What's up, everybody? Welcome to the first ever episode of Reconstructing Christianity. I'm Cliff from Not Gospel Studios. Today we are reacting to a deconstruction testimonial from one Sara Martin. Sara professes to be an evangelical Christian who went through a long deconstruction process over the course of a few years that started kind of in college, and then now she describes herself as someone who no longer believes in Jesus. It's important to note that we have nothing personal against Sara Martin. We're not attacking her personally. This is just our thoughts and reaction to her deconstruction story. We will post links to the original video and her website and everything in the description. So yeah, let's get started. This is Reconstructing Christianity. Just a real quick reminder before we dive in, guys. If you're not subscribed already, please subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and hit the notification bell. And in your comments, let us know if you like this kind of content and what else you want to see.
God is my life. He's given me life that people outside of him can't understand. He's changed me, what I like, what I want, how I think, what I want to be, and what I want to do with my life. I want to serve him because he gave everything for me. There is nothing else I want to do with my life, and nothing else that is worthwhile, except to serve him. I wrote those words at the age of 17, and meant every word of them.
So right now, I'm just going to go ahead and say that 17-year-old Sara seems like a little naive, which is to be expected of a 17-year-old. Sort of in that little poem is almost like a love letter to God. It kind of sounded like she was sort of pining after God. So it kind of makes me feel like she's set up for a search for purpose and identity from that point, which is common for a 17-year-old. You don't naturally have yourself exactly figured out when you're 17.
Never could I have imagined back then that someday I would ever reach a point where I would no longer consider myself to be a follower of Jesus. So stage one of my deconstruction was definitely going to college. I went to a small Christian liberal arts college, and yes, it was Christian, it was conservative, but college played a huge role in teaching me how to think critically.
I want to stop right there. I really, really appreciate the fact that she said college played a major role in teaching me how to think critically. There is a big time misconception right now about college, this idea that you don't even know how to properly think or to process information unless you go to college. That's not the truth. There are so many ways to learn, so many ways to educate yourself. Humans are complicated creatures. We're very similar in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways we're very different. We have different levels of insight, intellect, interests. That's a lot of ends. Someone like Sara may have needed to go to college to learn the process of critical thinking and deciphering facts from fiction. Some other people may be equipped with critical thinking skills while they're in their late teens, before they finish high school. Others may travel the world and figure out how to critically think and process and sort of grow and evolve their thoughts with more depth. I don't buy this idea that you have to go to college. Every single person has to go to college to learn how to critically think and to how to think. I believe it was Albert Einstein who said that the only thing that gets in the way of his learning is his education. More often than not with college, what I found is that the professors there are using it as a captive audience to basically pass off their ideology and their ideological viewpoint on the material as just the gospel truth of the way things are. Chandra from our podcast, she talks about an Old Testament professor that she had that spent the entire semester basically just bashing the Old Testament and just saying why the Old Testament is just wrong. That is sort of the equivalent to me of, let's say you were a gender studies major and you were really into gender studies, and say you had a professor that for an entire semester, all they did was say that there are only two genders, biological male, biological female, that's it. I happen to believe that the biological markers for sex are significant in defining gender. But if I were the type of person who was like, gender is super complicated and I want to do gender studies, and I had a professor that basically just spent the entire time harping on the two genders only, I would feel like I wasted my money.
Stage 2 also happened while I was in college, and that was going to Cambodia. My junior year of college, I spent 3 weeks on a cross-cultural trip to Cambodia. I think traveling outside of your own country in general is a very eye-opening experience.
I agree right here with this. Traveling is definitely a way, especially if you are from the United States, experiencing the world, going out and seeing how other cultures operate and navigating that terrain. It definitely gives you like an evolved and more enriched perspective. I've been to the Philippines several times. I've been to the Dominican, and I've seen different levels of poverty and different levels of existence that, you know, I knew and I'd heard stories about them, but I didn't even know they really existed. And when you see them, when you feel them, when you smell them, when you're in there, you know, with all of your senses, it makes it real, and it does have an impact on how you see the world. So I totally agree with her here.
It's hard to even summarize everything that I learned in Cambodia, but I think the biggest thing that contributed to my deconstruction was learning about Cambodia's genocide during the 1970s. It was really crazy to tour the sites of a former torture camp and see holes where mass graves were, where they put the bodies of victims, and visiting a memorial built for the victims that was just stacked high with thousands of skulls. It just really is something that has stuck with me to this day. And I remember during that trip seeing these things, just asking, like, where was God in this?
First off, Sara seems like a very empathetic person. She seems like a caring person. When you see the kind of imagery from some terrible tragedy like the Holocaust or the genocide in Cambodia, and it moves you with compassion, that tells things about who you are as a person. Kudos to her for being a compassionate individual. I think that's a very good character trait to have. Sadly, though, this is not an uncommon thing. I don't want to say cliche in deconstruction or losing your faith in God, but one of the most common things is that bad things happen. And when we see bad things that happen in the world, or we experience bad things in our life, we begin to say, well, God must not be real. A loving God must not be real if these bad things are happening. That just doesn't really make sense. One thing doesn't equal the next. Just because people, corrupt individuals on earth, do bad things, it doesn't have any bearing on whether or not God is truly good or truly just or even exists. We live in a world that is divorced from God, that is divorced from God concepts. Look no further than kids. We don't have to teach kids to be immoral at a young age. I don't have to teach my kids to lie to cover their own butt when they're in trouble. Counter to that, I have to teach them to value the truth and to tell the truth even when it's going to be detrimental to them. I have to instill in them good morals. I have to teach them to share, teach them to give. You don't have to teach a kid to be stingy or to hoard things and not share with the other kids. These are natural things. We live in a world where our nature is counter to a loving God. In this world, bad people are going to yield to that nature and do bad things. God doesn't answer for the bad choices of evil dictators. They answer for those choices.
The next stage was my first job that I got after graduating college. So the first job I got after I graduated was working as a mental health tech at a local psychiatric hospital. And for a lot of reasons, I was convinced that this was the job Jesus wanted me to be in. Felt like he confirmed it, he'd opened doors, he'd made a way for me to get this job, and it seemed like a perfect fit given my degree in psychology. However, when I went in for my first day of training, every fiber of my being felt like this is not a good fit for me. This is not where I should be working. Like, no. I ended up quitting after that first day because I knew it just was not for me.
So again, God is not responsible for our choices, right? And he's also not responsible for our misinterpretation of his plan or his will. She believed that God was pointing her in this direction. God was pointing her towards this job. Everything lines up, all the doors are opened, and she gets there, and every fiber in her being tells her she's not supposed to take that job. What's interesting to me is that she doesn't even question the feelings in her body. What caused every fiber in her being to tell her no? In my life, I kind of live by an Esther mentality. In the scriptures, Esther was going to present herself before the king. And in those days, if somebody tried to present themselves to the king without being summoned, the king could have them executed. If she didn't plead the case for the Jews, then a law had been passed that all of the Jews would be eradicated. The Esther mentality I'm talking about is that she prayed for 3 days. She said, I will pray and fast for 3 days, and then I will go see the king. She didn't say, I'm going to pray and fast, and if God tells me yes, then I'm going to go see the king. No, she said, I'm going to pray for 3 days, and then I'm going to go. She gave God an opportunity to tell her not to do it. If you tell me no, then I won't go. But unless you say no, I'm going to go. What caused every fiber in her being to just know, instinctively know that this job was wrong? Could it not have been God actually saying, no, don't take this job, it's going to be bad for you? God is not responsible for our misinterpretation of him. We're human beings trying to make sense of a divine, all-powerful being. We're going to get things wrong.
Stage 4 was my dating relationship unraveling. I had met this guy in college my sophomore year, and we dated for 2.5 years, almost 3 years. So I had graduated college. He lived out of state. We hardly ever got to see each other.
Let me just say, long-distance relationships, so hard to make that work. You set yourself up for disaster unless you are really, really solid in your foundation about who you are as a couple, who you are as individuals, and who you are before God.
The relationship was a huge contributor to the state of my mental health, and so eventually I felt like I was forced to pick between God's plan for my life, God's pick for me, God's pick of spouse for me, or my mental health. And ultimately, I chose my mental health.
Again, I hate to reiterate, but it seems, again, there's a process here. She went to college, she got exposed to new ideas, which again is a good thing. You know, it's good to hear other perspectives. It grows you as a person. I affirm that. Then she has bad thing one, she goes to Cambodia and sees this horrible tragedy, and how can God be real if this tragedy happened? Then bad thing two is a job that didn't work out the way she planned. Now bad thing three, a relationship that doesn't work out. A relationship that she was convinced was the right thing doesn't work out. Again, I can't help but stress the importance and significance of the fact that God is not responsible or beholden to our misinterpretations of his will and his plan. Joel, who's on the podcast often, he's here at Not Gospel Studios, he went through a bout with depression and suicide and things of that nature. I'm sure he didn't see that it was a good thing, but now he has a testimony, he has a ministry where so many people who have gone through the same thing, struggled with the same struggles, come to him. They've seen his movie that he's made, Rock for Jesus. They listen to his songs that he's done, and he has this incredible story, this beautiful story of redemption and rebuilding and recentering on God that has gotten so many people, pulled them out of the darkest circumstances and situations. He would never have expected that, I don't think, when he was in the middle of this real significant ordeal. God, who exists and can see into the future, who sees what's going to be or what can be, he sees the potential outcome. That same God is the one who's orchestrating and allowing things to occur to give us a story that facilitates the most good, the good for his kingdom, the good for others, and the good for us.
So stage 5 is depression. Yes, my mental health improved in different ways after I ended my relationship with my ex. However, I still was struggling with major depression at that point. My life really felt meaningless. I didn't know who I was anymore. My identity was entirely wrapped up in God and my faith in Jesus. God was my purpose. God told me who I was, and all of that was on shaking ground at this point. And so I was very, very depressed as a result of that.
Here she says that she went through this depression because all of her identity was wrapped up in God. I don't want to doubt what anybody says or cast shade on it. And like I said, she seems like a very smart, reasonable, empathetic, compassionate person just in this one video. Now, it could just totally be a facade. I don't know, but I'm just going by what I see here. But the thing I want to mark here is that actions speak louder than words. She says that her entire identity was wrapped up in God and Jesus and her faith. It seems like through the stages of her deconstruction and what she's describing in her life, that her identity was actually more wrapped up in what career she was going to have, her relationship status, because once these things started to crumble and fall apart, these little pieces, this significant pieces, I'm not going to belittle them, but the relationship that didn't work the way she wanted, the job that didn't work the way she wanted, when these things didn't work out the way she thought they would, all of a sudden she started wrestling with depression. In my opinion, that doesn't sound like your identity is found in God, but more so that your identity and your value and your self-worth is found in these other things, relationship status and job and employment, career. When you feel like your flight plan is derailed and it makes you wonder, what's God up to? It's easy to mistake, well, all my identity was wrapped up in God. Now I'm depressed because I'm having questions about that. Would she have went through that depression if the relationship worked exactly like she felt like it should, and the job it was the perfect job for her? Would she be depressed? Based on what she said, the answer probably is no. She wouldn't have felt depression or went through depression because she had a situational depression based on these circumstances in life.
Stage 6 was getting involved with a Christian small group that was made up of people in a similar boat as me who were kind of rethinking what faith in God looks like and who God is. And it was a really good group to be a part of. I felt like I had a safe space to wrestle with some of the existential questions I was asking at that point.
I don't have much to say about this small group. It's probably not a place to get counsel and receive counsel and leadership, because it seems like she's just in a place with a bunch of other people who are very shaky on their faith and don't know what they believe or questioning their belief. So it might be a good space to just vent all of the issues you're going with, but it doesn't seem like a place to get answers.
So the next stage in my deconstruction was meeting my now husband. For as long as I had been a Christian, I had been taught and fully believed that in order to be a real Christian, you needed to be a certain way, you needed to believe certain things, you needed to act certain ways, and your relationship with Jesus needed to look a certain way. However, in meeting my husband, who came from a Catholic background and later shifted to Lutheranism, I started being exposed to other types of Christians that didn't necessarily fit the boxes that I had been told you needed to check.
Again, I just want to say, I harp on this, but God's not beholden to our misinterpretations. I mean, there are a bunch of different denominations. There are obviously times when people in history got things wrong. There have been holy wars fought in the name of Jesus. The Crusades, a convert or die type strategy with Pope Innocent. That couldn't be any farther from Jesus's ideals of love thy neighbor and do good to those who would despitefully use you. God's not beholden to our misinterpretations of his plan. And there are going to be all kinds of different Christians in heaven. There really are. That doesn't make me question my faith as much as it makes me realize that God is a very, very big God. There are a lot of people on this planet he created, and they're going to find ways to him and his son, and he's capable of making those ways.
Moving on to stage 8, I was really in the middle of intense deconstruction at this point. I no longer felt safe asking the sorts of questions that I had progressed to asking in my Christian small group I was a part of. I felt like I was just thinking about things and asking questions that almost felt too heretical to bring up to this group. And so thankfully, I was able to find a life coach online that became my new safe space to really start deconstructing. And it was in working with this life coach that I first heard the term deconstruction and knew, wow, okay, this is what I'm going through. There is a name for what I'm going through, and I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. There are other people who go through this, and it's okay. Like, it's normal to go through this kind of stuff.
First off, it's worth noting that you don't have to have any kind of certification whatsoever to be a life coach. You can just post online that you're a life coach. I'm not belittling her experience with this person or the impact they had on their life, but when you're dealing with something as complicated as spirituality, theology, and what you believe on religion, you kind of need an expert in those fields, I would think, to get like really good counsel. If you want to know how to make the best ice cream, you're not going to go to a sandwich shop. You're going to learn how to make great sandwiches and maybe passable ice cream, because those guys aren't experts in ice cream. You're going to want to go to experts in ice cream and learn about ice cream. She doesn't say that this life coach also, for a credibility check, is a theologian or is a scholar, and has significant understanding of the material or relevant literature or anything like that. It's just someone that she gives significant access to big chunks of her personal life and who gives what she believes to be good advice for her life.
So stage 9 of my deconstruction was finding new communities. I didn't feel comfortable going to church anymore. I really didn't feel safe talking with a lot of the Christians that I had known from church and from college, and really sharing like what was going on internally. I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid of being abandoned.
Wow. It's no secret, it's even biblical that we as human beings are designed for community. We're designed for a relationship with God, relationship with one another. It's scripture. The first observation that God made about man after he made us is that it's not good for us to be alone. So it's obvious to me, it makes perfect sense that she'd be on a quest for community, for people who are wrestling with the same concepts she is. We're made for this. We're made to carry each other's burdens. We're made to enter in relationship with each other. By design, that's how human beings are meant to be. Ultimately, these relationships are supposed to push us toward God and towards our Creator, in my opinion. It's just unfortunate to me to see that these online groups and these platforms and these areas would be built on or based on sort of dismantling somebody's spirituality or their faith.
So in moving through all of these different stages, I'm currently at a point where I no longer consider myself to be a Christian.
Deconstruction of the faith is not like this surprising or shocking thing. It's no surprise to me that we see people falling away from the faith and values that they started out in growing up and in church. This is the fulfillment of prophecy. Jesus and the other followers in the New Testament talk about, and again, this is 2,000-year-old prophecy, they talk about in the end times a great falling away. They will not endure sound doctrine anymore. They will turn to fables. So deconstruction as a trend right now, the thing is I don't see it going away. You're going to see this more and more and more of people going through a deconstruction story and kind of like a case study or a testimonial about it, because it's prophesied. And the one thing that makes prophecy is that it comes true. It encourages me in my faith and sort of gives even more credibility and validity to what Jesus and the disciples said in the New Testament. This has been Reconstructing Christianity. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let us know what you think. Keep your eyes peeled for more Not Gospel Studios content. And as always, keep being awesome, because that's how God made you.